Okay, so now you have an understanding of the rhetorical triangle. The rhetorical triangle is where you should always begin any rhetorical analysis. If you ever want to figure out what's going on in a text, start by identifying the purpose, the audience, and the speaker's persona. The next thing you're going to want to look at is what we're going to talk about in this video, what we call the 3 appeals. And I promise this video is going to be a little bit shorter. The appeals are tools that an author or a speaker has at their disposal to try and move their audience, to try and get done what they're trying to get done with their text. There are 3 of them, and we use Greek words for them because the first people to talk about them were the ancient Greeks. I mentioned Aristotle in the previous video, and Aristotle came up with this terminology. The 3 appeals are what we call ethos. Ethos is the appeal to credibility. Pathos is the emotional appeal. And logos is the logical appeal. Those are the 3 levers that any writer or speaker can use to do what they want to do. They're as I said, the tools, the things that you use to accomplish your purpose. The first of the appeals that we are going to talk about is ethos, the appeal to credibility. So if you look at this cartoon here, we've got Homer Simpson in front of a classroom. As a teacher, there are several things here that give Homer, or at least should give him, ethos. First of all, notice that he's in the position of teacher. Obviously, he didn't burst into that classroom and seize control. Someone gave him that position. Just like your teachers at school, the fact that he gets to stand up in front of the class and teach tells us that he has ethos. He has credibility. There's some reason why we should believe him. Also, notice the way that Homer's dressed. He's wearing a jacket and tie. Presentation often gives you ethos. It makes him look like someone who's worth listening to. But there are several things going on in this picture that detract from Homer's ethos, that detract from his credibility, and that's the source of the humor. His expression in particular shows insecurity. Confidence is something that gives a speaker or a writer ethos, that makes us want to believe the things that they're saying. So that's kind of the source of humor in this picture. Homer is presented as someone with ethos. He's acting like he's someone that people should listen to, that he should have some sort of credibility, but we know that he clearly doesn't. There are a lot of different ways to get ethos. Obviously, things like credentials give you ethos. The fact that I've been to college gives me ethos in teaching a class. Life experience gives you ethos. The fact that I've been teaching for 12 years gives me ethos. But there are other ways to get ethos. You can have ethos because you are humble. That can be a quality that you have that makes you seem like a believable speaker. You can have ethos because you have suffered. If you've gone through something, that makes you credible. So just because someone doesn't have a credential doesn't mean that they don't have ethos. You as students have ethos in a lot of different ways because you have a different perspective on things, because you have unique life experiences. Those things can give you ethos just the same as a teacher in the front of the room has ethos. The next appeal that we're going to talk about is pathos, the emotional appeal. A speaker uses pathos when they try to get the audience's emotions involved. So here's another cartoon. Here we have Homer Simpson outside of his house. And in this image, there's a lot of pathos that's being generated. The emotion that the creators of this image are trying to make us feel is sadness or pity, right? And that's, by the way, an easy way to remember what pathos means. It comes from the same root that gives us words like sympathetic, right, or pathetic, or empathy, right? So what's going on in this picture that generates pathos? Well, Homer's out in the cold without a jacket on. He's in the darkness, and this is emphasized by the fact that there are some houses behind him that are lit up, that seem warm and cozy, that carry these connotations of family and togetherness. And here we have Homer alone in the dark, in the cold. There's a lot of things going on in this picture that are set up to give Homer pathos, to make us feel bad for him. The third appeal is logos, the logical appeal. If a speaker's trying to get you to believe something or do something, maybe they're going to use ethos, their credibility. Well, you should do this because I know what I'm talking about. Maybe they're going to use pathos. You should do this because won't you feel bad if you don't, or something like that. Or they can use logos and try and look at evidence and bring it to some sort of logical conclusion. So in this series of cartoons here, we have Homer Simpson goes speeding past the police. They see that he's traveling at 110 miles an hour, and Chief Wiggum says, "Oh, let him go, Lou. Someone going that fast has no time for a ticket." That was my Chief Wiggum impression. I hope you thought it was awesome. Chief Wiggum is attempting to use logos here. He's looking at evidence. He's thinking about how he thinks the world works, and he's applying that to his evidence to draw a conclusion. Now, I'm going to be weird and explain the joke again and point out that the humor comes from the fact that he uses logos ineffectively, but that's what's going on. You can think of the three appeals in terms of the rhetorical triangle. Ethos is the speaker's credibility. Why should we believe the speaker? It has a lot to do with persona. How you present yourself should be designed to give you ethos. Logos has a lot to do with the purpose, with the thesis that's being argued in the piece. Good logos will make the purpose seem logically clear, that we should believe your thesis idea. And pathos is closely connected to audience. We're trying to get the audience involved emotionally in what's going on. So let's think about the examples that we were looking at in the previous video and talk about the use of the three appeals. Let's talk about Lou Gehrig's farewell address. In Lou Gehrig's speech, he takes advantage of ethos, pathos, and logos to try and get his purpose across to his audience. What gives Gehrig ethos? Well, he has a tremendous amount of ethos because he is a Yankee sports hero speaking in Yankee Stadium. He has extensive credentials. All his many things that he accomplished as a member of the Yankees give him ethos. But he also has ethos because of the way he represented himself in public over time, over the course of his career. Unlike some other famous sports figures who got in trouble with the law or were renowned for substance abuse or something like that, Lou Gehrig is someone who is always respected by people. That gives him ethos. And then if you look at the speech, the way that he presents himself as humble, as thankful, as modest, those things give him ethos as well. We want to listen to someone who seems gracious, as Gehrig does in his speech. What about pathos? This speech is obviously ripe with pathos because of what's happened to Gehrig. When the fans see him, they're thinking about someone who was this incredible physical specimen, who has been reduced by illness and is no longer able to do the thing that he used to be great at. So obviously there's going to be pathos there. In this case, the audience is set up to feel pity or sympathy for Gehrig. But the way that Gehrig constructs the speech is then designed to make them feel inspired, to make them feel good about themselves. So he builds up pathos in the way that he talks about life. Finally, if you go back and look through the speech, it's clearly laid out in a very logical pattern. In the speech, Gehrig makes a series of claims about why he is the luckiest man on the face of the earth. That's the thesis of his piece, that he isn't unlucky because he has this illness. He's in fact lucky because of all the great experiences he had in his life, and he defends that very logically. So he builds up logos throughout. How about Einstein and his letter? Well, Einstein clearly takes advantage of the three appeals as well. Obviously, Albert Einstein has a tremendous amount of ethos because of his accomplishments. If you ask someone to name a famous scientist, they're all going to start their list with Albert Einstein, especially if they are a layman, someone who doesn't know a lot about science. He's famous. He's a celebrity. So in addition to being very credentialed in his field, he's also someone that everyone has heard of. He's kind of an icon. In fact, you can use his name as a term for a smart person. That's all ethos. There are other things in that situation that give him ethos. Just like Gehrig had ethos because he'd been asked to speak to this huge crowd, Einstein has ethos because he's getting his letter published in a major newspaper. That gives him ethos. Then the way that he presents himself in the letter gives him a kind of ethos as well, because he's able to come across as kind and as thoughtful. Those are things that give him ethos, that make him seem like someone we should listen to. How about pathos? Well, in this letter, there's a real sense of warmth, that Einstein is feeling very kind towards this girl and being a very sort of open and generous with her. So that creates a kind of pathos. We feel good about that. We feel good about this great man who's willing to exchange ideas with a sixth grader. So that gives him a kind of pathos. And finally, there is logos. Einstein wants to make this argument that the more you understand about the universe, the more you realize that there are things that you can't understand. And he takes us logically through the process of coming to that conclusion. So just like Gehrig, Einstein uses all three appeals in order to accomplish his purpose.